Let them come. There's one dwarf yet in Moria who still draws breath, Gimli remarks in Peter Jackson's film adaptation of The Fellowship of the Ring. The sooner they arrive, the better, he growled, eyes blazing with ancestral fury. There remains one dwarf in Moria who still draws breath. The equivalent passage from Ian Chesterfield's novelization, itself adapted from Jackson's film. The transformation of a story across different mediums, such as film and prose, inevitably alters its delivery, tone, and impact. And these two examples reveal crucial differences in how film and prose engage with their audiences. In the film, Gimli's line is short, sharp, and defiant. The brevity mirrors the pacing needs of a visual medium, especially during an action-heavy sequence. In contrast, the novelization expands the moment. The added internal and visual detail gives the reader insight into Gimli's heritage, pride, and emotional state. While both mediums recount the same event, their executions diverge to suit their forms. To further explore these differences, this video will look at one part of the story in both the film and the novelization of The Fellowship of the Ring. First, we'll watch a short clip from the film. Then, we'll read the matching chapter from the novelization. Since films move quickly and can show a lot in just a few minutes, while novels often take pages to describe the same events, we'll break the novelization chapters into short passages. After each passage, we'll stop to talk about what works well in the novel, what might be stronger in the film, and how each version tells the story in its own way. We'll go back and forth like this until we've worked through the whole chapter. At the end, we'll wrap everything up by thinking about what each medium does best, where they might struggle, and how comparing them helps us understand the story in a new way. By the time we're finished, we'll have a much clearer idea of how storytelling changes when it moves from screen to page, and why that matters. Let's begin. We cannot get out. They are coming. Fool of a Duke! Throw yourself in next time and rid us of your stupidity! Mr. Frodo! Orcs! Get back! Stay close to Gandalf! have a cave troll.
Let them come. There's one dwarf yet in Moria who still draws breath.
I think I'm getting the hang of this. Frodo! Aragorn! Aragorn! Frodo! 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 He's alive. I'm all right. I'm not hurt. You should be dead. That spear would have skewered a wild boar. I think there's more to this hobbit than meets the eye. Mithril. You are full of surprises, Master Baggins. To the bridge of Khazad-dûm. Next, We'll read the first passage from the chapter of the novelization, and then compare and analyze the differences. Orcs! The elf exclaimed, his keen senses already detecting what the others could only fear. The ranger turned to the 4 smallest members of their company. Stay back, he commanded, his voice steady despite the danger. Keep close to the wizard. The hobbits gathered behind their grey-cloaked protector as the 2 warriors rushed toward the splintered doors. As they pushed against the weathered wood, trying to secure the chamber, the man from Gondor suddenly jerked backward. 2 black-fletched arrows embedded in the doorframe, mere inches from his face. His eyes met the ranger's, shock giving way to grim understanding. They have a cave troll, he said, his voice unnervingly calm given the news. Working swiftly, the pair scavenged weapons from the fallen defenders, ancient spears and axes that had failed their previous owners, using them to barricade the doorway. The company drew their weapons, preparing for the inevitable breach. The dwarf leapt atop his kinsman's tomb, battle-axe gripped in both hands, his face a mask of vengeful determination.
The sooner they arrive, the better,
he growled, eyes blazing with ancestral fury.
There remains one dwarf in Moria who still draws breath.
The elf and the ranger positioned themselves before the barricaded entrance, bows drawn and ready. The man from Gondor stood beside them, sword in one hand, shield raised with the other. Behind them, the hobbits formed a tight cluster around the wizard, their small blades trembling slightly in inexperienced hands. A thunderous impact shook the doors, followed by another. The wood began to splinter as crude weapons hacked at it from the other side. Through a newly formed hole, they glimpsed misshapen silhouettes moving in the darkness beyond. The elf adjusted his aim and loosed an arrow through the opening. A shriek of pain rewarded his precision. With a final crash, the doors gave way, and a horde of creatures poured into the chamber, smaller than orcs, but no less vicious, with mottled grey skin and eyes that gleamed with malice. They charged forward in a disorganized wave, their crude weapons raised. Arrows found their marks with deadly accuracy, felling the first line of attackers before they could reach the defenders. Then the enemy was upon them, and the chamber erupted into chaos. The dwarf's axe rose and fell in devastating arcs, cleaving helmets and skulls with equal ease. The warriors from Gondor and the north fought side by side, their blades a blur of lethal movement. Even the wizard abandoned his staff's light in favor of its use as a weapon, wielding it alongside his sword with surprising agility for one who appeared so aged. The hobbits, despite their lack of training, fought with desperate courage. The stocky gardener discovered an unexpected talent for combat, driving his short blade into the belly of an approaching orc. Nearby, his companions darted between the legs of their larger foes, using their small stature to their advantage. They might have prevailed against this first assault, were it not for what came next. This opening passage from the novelization works wonderfully because it luxuriates in details that the film either condensed or left implied. Prose allows for a layering of perspective, descriptions of the elf's, quote, keen senses and the ranger's steady voice despite the danger, end quote, convey not just the action, but an interior dimension, hinting at perception, emotion, and character in ways that the film could only suggest through acting or editing. Similarly, the specific noting of, quote, two black-fletched arrows embedded mere inches from his face, end quote, lets the reader linger in a moment of suspended threat, holding the mental image in stillness before moving forward. The film delivered this as a flash of movement, almost too quickly to absorb fully, whereas the prose freezes time and invites us to dwell in the danger. Prose also gives flexibility in controlling the reader's focus. The shift from a wide view of the company to the intimate note about the hobbit's, quote, small blades trembling slightly in inexperienced hands, end quote, builds tension by juxtaposing vulnerability with the martial readiness of the warriors. This kind of tonal layering of fear, resolve, and grim humor comes across cleanly in text because the narrator can pivot from one emotional beat to another without needing a cutaway shot or tonal shift in the score. That said, the medium's strengths can also drift into weaknesses. The prose occasionally edges toward overstatement, as in the dwarf's, quote, face a mask of vengeful determination, end quote, or the ancestral fury phrasing, which feel less earned when stacked against the already heightened tone of the passage. In the film, such moments were communicated visually, without requiring explicit labeling, letting the audience interpret the emotional weight themselves. Likewise, the description of fighting moves like, quote, the dwarf's axe rose and fell in devastating arcs, end quote, can read as generic when divorced from more tactile sensory cues like sound, weight, and the messy unpredictability of combat that the film camera and sound design were able to convey instantly. Let's continue. The floor trembled beneath their feet as something massive pushed its way through the shattered doorway. Stone crumbled around the frame as a monstrous form squeezed through. A cave troll, its grey-green skin like living stone, small eyes filled with brutish rage. A heavy chain hung from the iron collar around its thick neck, the handlers who once controlled it now using the links as weapons themselves. The troll's head nearly brushed the ceiling as it surveyed the chamber with primitive malice, a spiked club clutched in one massive fist. It swung the weapon in a wide arc, forcing the defenders to scatter. The dwarf dodged the blow, burying his axes into the skulls of two orcs, before turning his attention to the larger threat. The warriors pressed their attack against the mass of smaller enemies, while the elf sent arrow after arrow into exposed throats, desperately trying to protect the outmatched hobbits. The troll fixated on the ranger, its club whistling through the air as it descended for a killing blow. In a flash of movement, the man from Gondor intercepted the strike, his blade slicing deep into the creature's scaly arm. The troll reeled backward, green blood spurting from the wound as it bellowed in pain and rage. The gardener found himself directly in the path of the enraged beast. As the troll raised its club to crush him, he dove between its trunk-like legs, scrambling away on hands and knees. The club shattered the stone floor where he had stood moments before. The hobbits seized the opportunity to pull their master behind a massive pillar. The dwarf, seeing his companions temporarily safe, hurled his axe with all his might. The weapon buried itself in the troll's chest, driving it into a frenzy of pain. It smashed its club against the stone tomb, shattering the memorial to the fallen dwarven lord. The battle became a desperate dance of attack and retreat. The elf found higher ground, firing arrow after arrow at the troll's thick hide. Most bounced harmlessly off its armoured skin, but a few found vulnerable spots, further enraging the creature. The troll swung its chain in wide arcs, forcing the elf to duck and weave between the deadly strikes. One swing wrapped the chain around a nearby pillar. The elf seized his chance, stepping on the taut links to secure them, before using the chain as a pathway to the troll's shoulders. There, he notched an arrow and fired directly into the creature's skull at point-blank range. The troll roared and thrashed, throwing the elf clear before it could crush him. Meanwhile, the gardener found himself cornered by a trio of orcs. With nothing else at hand, he swung his small cooking pan in desperation, connecting with a sickening crack against an orc's skull. To his astonishment, the creature collapsed instantly. He stared at the impromptu weapon in wonder, before swinging it again at another approaching enemy, with similar results. "I think I'm getting the hang of this," he muttered, newfound confidence in his voice. Across the chamber, the ring-bearer was separated from his companions by the troll's wild attacks. He pressed himself against one of the massive stone pillars, trying to make himself as small as possible. The troll sensed his presence, its bulbous head appearing around one side of the column as it sniffed the air like a predator seeking prey. The hobbit moved silently to the opposite side, holding his breath as the massive creature searched for him. For a moment, he thought himself safe, until the troll's face suddenly loomed before him from the other direction. The hobbit stumbled backward, falling onto the hard stone floor as the creature advanced. The ranger fought desperately to reach his charge, cutting down orcs that blocked his path. He could see the troll cornering the small figure against the wall. With a final burst of strength, he leaped between them, driving a long spear deep into the troll's abdomen. The creature howled, swinging one massive arm in retaliation. The blow caught the ranger squarely, sending him flying against the far wall, where he crumpled, motionless. The ring-bearer rushed to his fallen protector, shaking him frantically, but the man remained unresponsive. The troll, mad with pain, wrenched the spear from its own flesh. Before the hobbit could react, the creature drove the weapon forward with terrible force. The spearhead struck the small figure directly in the chest, lifting him off his feet and pinning him against the wall. A cry of anguish rose from the companions as they witnessed the seemingly fatal blow. This passage shows off both the immersive power and the potential pitfalls of prose as a medium for an action-heavy scene. On the strength side, prose gives space to articulate the physical scale of the troll and the emotional scale of the threat in ways the film could only imply. The description of the troll's, quote, grey-green skin like living stone, end quote, doesn't just tell us what it looks like. It frames how the characters perceive it, shading the monster with mythic dread. The constant shifting of perspective from dwarf to elf to hobbit lets the reader experience the battle as a patchwork of personal stakes rather than one continuous spectacle, which can give the fight more texture and emotional variety. The weaknesses, however, emerge in the same places, where the prose leans too heavily on describing action beat by beat. Because the narration is constantly hopping between micro-events, the dwarves throw, the elves chain maneuver, the gardener's cooking pan, it risks diffusing the sense of a single coherent flow of combat. In the film, these actions were shown in rapid alternation, sustaining urgency. But here, the linear sequencing makes them feel slightly compartmentalized, which can flatten momentum. Another challenge is physical clarity. The chain pillar sequence, for instance, is inventive, but without the spatial shorthand of a camera move. The reader must piece together the geometry of the action from sentence fragments. For a reader visualizing in real time, that can be satisfying, but it can also momentarily break immersion if they have to stop and reconstruct what's happening. Let's continue. The wizard turned, his face etched with disbelief and grief. The gardener screamed his master's name, hacking frantically at any enemy between him and his friend. The two younger hobbits exchanged a look of grim determination before launching themselves onto the troll's back. They drove their small blades repeatedly into its thick hide, clinging desperately as the creature bucked and thrashed. The dwarf and the wizard renewed their attacks from below, forcing the troll to divide its attention. It grabbed one of the hobbits from its back, dangling him upside down by the ankle, before the dwarf's axe forced it to release its grip. The combined assault from all sides drove the beast to distraction, allowing the elf to find a clear shot. As the troll reared its head back to roar, the archer loosed an arrow that flew true, burying itself deep in the creature's throat. The troll froze, its small eyes widening in shock. It swayed for a moment, blood bubbling from its mouth, before toppling forward with a ground-shaking crash that dislodged the young hobbit from its shoulders. In the silence that followed, the ranger regained consciousness and scrambled to the ring-bearer's side. The small figure lay motionless, the spear still protruding from his chest. The company gathered around, faces drawn with grief, until a gasping cough broke the silence. The hobbit's eyes fluttered open as he drew a ragged breath. The gardener knelt beside him, relief washing over his dirt-streaked face. He's alive!" he exclaimed. The ring-bearer sat up slowly, wincing as he touched the tear in his shirt, where the spear had struck. Yet remarkably, there was no blood. "I'm all right," he assured them, his voice weak but steady. "I'm not hurt." The ranger stared in amazement. "That spear would have skewered a wild boar. By rights, you should be dead." The wizard's eyes twinkled with knowing wisdom. "I believe there's more to our hobbit friend than meets the eye." The ring-bearer hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt to reveal something luminous beneath. A vest of interlocking silver rings that shimmered like moonlight on water. The dwarf's breath caught in his throat. "Mithril," he whispered reverently. "You continue to surprise us, Master Baggins." But their moment of relief was short-lived. From the great hall beyond came the ominous rhythm that they had heard before. The drums, louder and faster than before. Shadows danced on the walls outside the chamber as countless more enemies approached. The wizard's face hardened with resolve. "To the bridge of Khazad-dûm," he commanded. This final passage shows prose playing to one of its greatest advantages over film, the ability to shift rapidly from intense physical action to intimate emotional revelation without feeling jarring. The moment after the troll's death, the, quote, sudden silence, end quote, and the gathering of the company is handled with an elasticity of tone that lets grief, suspense, and relief all exist in quick succession. In the film, that pivot relied heavily on the actors' performances and pacing in the edit. But here, the narration can simply tell us where the emotional weight lies at each moment, guiding the reader's interpretation directly. The survival reveal works particularly well, because the text can draw out the misdirection and hold the tension before releasing it with Frodo's cough. The absence of blood and the reveal of the mithril vest carry extra resonance because the narration can dwell on the tactile and visual qualities without breaking momentum. In the film, the camera had to linger visually to make sure the audience noticed the gleam. But here, the image is fused with the dwarves' reverent recognition in a single beat. Where the prose is less successful is in its tendency towards straightforward reportage in the heat of action. The hobbits on the troll's back, the coordinated strikes, the elves killing shot. These are briskly told, but lean on familiar phrasing that risks blending into the background of countless fantasy battles. The film could differentiate these moments with distinct visual choreography and sound cues, but in prose, the language has to carry that variety. And here, it sometimes defaults to stock formulations rather than sharpening each beat into something uniquely memorable. In summary, this chapter thrives on the written form's ability to place the reader exactly where the author wants, inside minds, behind shields, watching the shifting lines of defense. Even the slightly stylized heroic tone can feel appropriate here, because the prose is borrowing from the mythic register of the source material, something that film can match visually, but rarely verbalize without tipping into melodrama. The result is a scene that leans heavily on the strengths of prose, perspective, description, and thematic emphasis, while revealing its challenges in immediacy, restraint, and physical dynamism. Thank you for watching this comparative analysis. Next time, we'll be comparing the scene where the Fellowship attempt to escape the mines of Moria with the corresponding chapter in the novelization, and analyzing the differences. Take care, and if you're listening to this, please send help.